Welcome to the channel. Today, we're exploring some unbelievable story. Stay tuned and let's dive in. The musty odor of the waiting area did little to calm my stomach. I glanced about, then got back to my feet, wondering what I was doing here. To my left sat my lovely wife Sophia, who looked as brilliant as ever, a beauty that never failed to make me feel butterflies. My daughter Sophia sat on my right, and she was, in many ways, my lifesaver. My thoughts returned to the day I met each of them. I was a different guy then. Mr. Baker's voice cried out, pulling me back into the room. "We will be ready for you in around 25 minutes. The other witness has just taken the stand." I gave a sigh. It would be the first time in over a year that I would see my ex-wife, with whom I had been married for 10 years. However, a lot has changed since then. I'll start with the day my life changed forever. It was a typical spring day in Charleston, Virginia. I was coming home from my customer account work at Charleston Public Utilities. Hannah, my ex-wife, had essentially forced me to take the job, which I despised. "It's more secure and financially rewarding," she would explain. "It's better than construction." I should have realized sooner that all she appeared to care about was money and social standing. I don't want to say too much about Hannah, except that even at 34, she was the most beautiful lady in the world to me. She was brilliant, humorous, and madly in love with me from the time we met. I always assumed she was out of my league. When we met, I was working in construction in my hometown of Pittsburgh. I was tall, attractive, and had a perpetual tan from spending so much time outside. We've been together since we first started dating. I was her defender and entertainer, and she looked beyond my lack of academic credentials and appeared to love me even more passionately when she completed her master's degree. We returned to her hometown of Charleston and finally married. Her parents were not pleased with me at all, and they made no effort to disguise their feelings. Both they and her old acquaintances thought she was too good for me and asked why she would marry below herself. Her father called me a good-looking fool. Nonetheless, we were happy and loved each other more than anything. I was an only kid, and both of my parents died in my late teens, so Hannah became my whole universe. I found work in construction, and Hannah landed a great position at a financial firm run by a friend of her father's. When the recession came in 2009, I lost my job, and Hannah's pay saw us through the difficult days. If anything, this made her parents adore me even more. It did put some pressure on our marriage. Well, I suppose it would be when the people you care about and mingle with tell you your spouse is a loser. Sadly, it had an impact on my friendships back home in Pittsburgh. I was now traveling in other circles, at least according to them. My closest buddy, Liam, was always there for me. He was more like a brother to me, and his parents helped me cope with the death of my own parents. Hannah was the one who convinced me to accept the job at the utility company. I despised it, as I already said. Indoors, computers, and speaking to people on the phone in a phony voice, it was my image of hell. But I made an effort for Hannah, and first and foremost, we needed to have children someday. Hannah, on the other hand, prioritized having and seeming to have a good profession. Image, riches, and prestige did not worry me, but I did whatever Hannah asked. I even attempted to be the person Hannah wanted me to be. Unfortunately, when you stop being yourself, things tend to become worse, and you ultimately become dissatisfied. I was no longer the upbeat Pittsburgh builder who enjoyed having fun and being around people. I was sad most days. I gained weight, stopped grooming, and seldom interacted, if ever. Yes, I was an overweight office worker married to a wealthy financial analyst who went to elegant dinners and cocktail parties with Charleston's upper class. I wasn't one of them. They knew it, and so did I. I came into our driveway and was astonished to find Hannah's vehicle parked in the garage. I got out of the vehicle and headed to the home, filled with fear. I'm not sure why, but when I entered the kitchen, Hannah sat at the table, serious yet awake. She had some documents in front of her, and as I was ready to begin, she cut me off. "Nathan, we need to talk." Those famous words struck me like a ton of bricks. I could tell she was frightened, but as I sat down, I noticed no tears. "What is it, babe?" I inquired. "Everything okay?" she said, steeling herself and clearing her throat as if she were about to give a huge speech. "I'm sorry, Nathan, but I want a divorce," she said plainly and gently. My heart sank and my gut clenched. I was stunned because it seemed like someone reached inside my chest and snatched my heart. That dreadful sense of unexpected loss, which I had experienced twice before, is the worst emotion you can imagine. I stared at her and said, trembling, "But why?" I stammered. "I have fallen in love with somebody else," she remarked, without showing any sympathy for me. I was devastated, but curiously, I was not astonished. Nathan Baker, who used to wreak chaos, no longer exists. Hannah had seen to it. I was a shell of the guy I used to be, and now she was bringing me down with a last stroke of the sword. "How long?" I said huskily. "For months," she continued, and I simply gazed at her. "But now I want us to be together and get married," she asserted, disregarding my sentiments. I was staring at a lady I no longer recognized, and in turn, she was looking at a guy she no longer recognized. "I don't want to know the details, but I do want to know why," I eventually stated, concerned about what her response might be. She wasted no time in responding. "Just look at yourself, Nathan. You are not the man I married. You're overweight, haven't shaved in years, and when was the last time you had a decent haircut or bought new clothes?" she said in a rush of what must have been long-held emotions. "You're a shell of the man I fell in love with, and let's be honest, you've never been on my intellectual level, have you?" Her voice was sarcastic. "God knows how many times in the last decade I have had to defend you to my parents, friends, and colleagues. Justified to them why we married in the first place," she went on, and immediately, I wondered where the girl I fell in love with had fled to and who this ruthless person was sitting in front of me. "And rich, I mean my new man is younger than you, fit, attractive, and has a successful business in a big house close to Mommy and Daddy in Myrtle Beach," she said. Every each word she spoke seemed like a blade penetrating my flesh. "Do I know him?" I inquired. "He runs the gardening company that operates in the neighborhood," she told me. "He is a sole trader at the moment, but we want to expand the business together," she said. As I stayed motionless, she had finished and sat there, no sure awaiting another question to destroy me even harder. When I remained silent, she slid the papers towards me. "Daddy and his attorney helped me draft our divorce papers. I think it's a good deal for you, seeing as I paid the majority of the mortgage. Daddy recommended a 70-30 split in my favor for the house, which we can sell because I'll be moving in with Rich." I just let her continue, and she added, "I think a 50-50th split of our savings is only fair, and I will not require alimony, though I'm sure I could fight for it." The arrogance and malice in her speech were now obvious to me. How had I missed it all these years? I felt like an idiot, and I believe she assumed I had always been one. "Come on, let's be honest, Nathan. I make way more than you do, and my new man makes plenty, too, so I won't touch your 401k if you sign the papers and don't fight me for anything." She abruptly stopped speaking as I stared her dead in the eyes. She must have caught a glimpse of the old Nathan because she swallowed hard. I picked up a pen and signed away 12 years of marriage. I rose from the table, walked to her bedroom, packed my belongings, and then returned. She was seated at the table, reading the papers as I passed through the door and out of her life. "Liam, is she effing crazy?" I said. "Liam is family to me, and I have unfortunately ignored him over the previous several years. However, as real brothers, we can look beyond any offenses and will always be there for one another in times of need." As we discussed what had occurred, I could hear someone in the background, and Liam was attempting to mute them. "Is that Martha?" I inquired. "What is she saying?" "She said, 'Good riddance to the stuck-up 304, Liam said. Martha and Liam had no filters, and I really missed it. This is how I used to be. Hey, Nathan, I have a guy who knows someone who does these investigations on debtors for local companies. I can get him to take a look into this guy for you. You know, see if the crap is legit and all," Liam said with his typical brusque tone. "I don't really care, Liam," I said despondently. "This guy screws you over, steals your wife, and you just sit back and take it." Liam said, his voice rising. "You, Nathan." "I know," I said quietly. "Go ahead and do what you like." I provided him the limited facts I knew about this new individual. He was the neighborhood gardener, so it wasn't difficult to get further information if Martha's man wanted it. "You need to get your head back in the game, Nathan, and return to your old self again," Liam said before we hung up. I leaned back on the cheap hotel bed and glanced at the buzzing ceiling fan over my head after hanging up the phone. I attempted to make sense of everything that had transpired in my life, not just the past few hours, but the previous 12 years. Sleep denied me, so I grabbed the bottle of whiskey on the table and drank straight from it. I continued doing this for the following several weeks. I used to call in sick or show up intoxicated at work, and the scent of liquor would get me sent home. Everyone in the workplace was staring at me, making snarky remarks behind my back, and I felt as if I was seeing myself from above, going through the motions of life. I was sent to a doctor, and although that helped, being off work gave me more time to contemplate and reflect on the past. I never made it to the Roberts and Hill offices to complete my divorce. A letter was sent to my workplace since no one knew where I was and no one would bother searching. I knew it for certain. The letter included the divorce settlement and a check for $130,000, which represented my part of the home funds and furnishings. The settlement stated what Hannah said at the kitchen table, and since I did not attend the meeting, it was concluded in absentia. I had no clue whether anything was legal and above board, but I had no fight left in me, at least not enough, to face Hannah and her formidable inner circle. A month had gone since Hannah informed me that she wanted a divorce, and I had finally deposited the check into my account. I noticed that all of our other accounts had been closed and Hannah had deleted her name from our joint account. However, as I was strolling aimlessly out of the bank, I heard someone yell my name. I first disregarded it, but as I turned to look, I recognized Matthew and Jessica, my former neighbors. "Hey, Nathan," Matthew remarked, approaching me. "Sorry to hear about the divorce," he replied uneasily. Jessica, his wife, was a nosy neighbor who enjoyed gossiping, and she was quick to speak out. "I can't believe Hannah would leave you and remarry so quickly," she told me. I stared at her, surprised. I thought I remembered Hannah stating she wanted to marry the man, but due to my state of mind at the moment, I forgot. "Oh, you did?" Jessica persisted. "I had no idea," I answered casually. "We thought you guys were the real deal," Matthew added. "Then we see she is married to this Jacob Taylor." It was the first time I had heard his entire name, yet Jessica seemed to shrink and squirm at the mention of his name. I disregarded it because I suddenly realized I had a surname to offer to Liam's acquaintance, rather than simply Rich the gardener of Charleston. "He was the gardener whose services your neighborhood uses," I said, providing information that was not requested. As I did, I saw Matthew whirl around to face Jessica, who had become a brilliant crimson. "A gardener," he screamed at Jessica, garnering glances from onlookers. "Why have you gone red?" Matthew inquired. I quickly explained, realizing I had stepped straight into trouble. "No, never," Jessica protested. "He tried it on with me once and I put him in his place." Matthew was now enraged, appearing irate as Jessica proceeded. "He's a sleaze and every time he's due, I go out for a few hours to avoid him," she added, grabbing for his hand and begging him. "We need to talk," he began, then turned to me and apologized. He took her by the hand and led her along the walkway. "I suppose that's one less consumer for Hannah and Jacob's expanding business," I reasoned, managing to grin for the first time in a while. The news of the marriage struck me hard. I fell back into sadness and sought for the drink again. I figured I'd try drinking myself to death, that way all of my anguish would be gone and I wouldn't have to carry on with my worthless life. The following morning, I awoke from my hotel bed and collapsed on the floor, puking all over me. I'd officially reached rock bottom. I slid into the shower on my hands and knees, letting the cold water fall on me. As I emerged, I glanced in the mirror, and what I saw in the reflection astonished me. "You?" I yelled at the guy staring back at me. "I need to get better," I sank to my knees and sobbed for the first time since my father died. "I just want to be happy," I exclaimed into my hands. I realized things needed to change. The next Monday, I came into my office and started working. For some reason, my personal mail was on my desk. I assumed it was diverted there since no one knew where I lived. As I was reading through what was mostly garbage, I came across a flyer for a local club that promised to get anybody in shape in 12 weeks. I scoffed to myself, expecting it to take much longer, but I thought, what the hell, maybe this was the change I needed. That evening, when I walked into the gym, I had no clue what the gorgeous young teacher standing in front of me would think of this person who had been 37. I felt like an 80-year-old guy, but as I got closer to her, she extended her hand, which I gratefully took. "I'm Grace," she said. To say she thought I was a disaster would be an understatement, yet between her lovely blue eyes, I saw a glimmer of hope for me. They appeared to instill some energy in me, not desire or romance, but honesty and compassion. So, during the following week, I was able to move out of the hotel and sign a lease for a modest studio apartment in the city, near to the gym. I determined to stick to my 12-week schedule and see where life led me. I wanted to reduce around 45 pounds, and the easiest place to start was to get rid of all of the unopened alcohol bottles in my possession. I worked really hard over the next month. My life revolved entirely on work and the gym. Liam and Jessica also made many visits, most likely to check on me. But at the end of the month, with Grace's consistent support, I had dropped 12 pounds. The benefit of spending almost every day at the gym was that I got to know Grace much better. She consented to coffee one evening after my session, and I learned a little about her life. She was reared by a single parent and was studying at a community college to become a full-time fitness instructor and nutritionist. She clearly knew her thing, and I warmed to her even more. I informed her about my recent divorce and previous life in Pittsburgh. I revealed to her that I had reached rock bottom before joining the gym and meeting her. I tried not to come off as a desperate creep, but she had more compassion and emotional maturity than her age. It wasn't until many sessions later that I emerged from the showers to meet her. I was blown away. Grace was chatting to a lady who, at first glance, resembled her sister, Emma. "I know, but it's the truth," Grace said. Grace caught me gazing and approached me before I could turn and move away. "Nathan, this is my mom, Sophia," she added, beaming as she extended her hand. Our gazes locked, and I felt a wave of humiliation wash over me. My gut clenched, and I was at a loss for words. The stillness was becoming unpleasant. "It means he likes you, Mom," Grace said, laughing and rescuing me in the process. "He's quiet when he likes someone," she said, as if she had known me my whole life. The fact is that I wasn't always a quiet, timid, or modest guy. Years of what I now consider to be emotional abuse will do that to you. Grace left us to grab her belongings as Sophia and I began to converse. When Grace returned, she asked me across the street to supper. I hesitated at first, but her perseverance made it difficult to say no. I assumed if she had a father, she'd have him wrapped around her tiny finger. Sophia was so kind and nice at supper. I could see the fruit had not fallen far from the tree. As the evening went, I felt more at ease in their company. There was no need for showmanship or pretentiousness. Sophia joked with me, putting me at ease. We briefly discussed our history, and I suppose Grace told her mother about my life. I left that night feeling better than I had in months. I even saved Sophia's phone number when she insisted on cleaning up the mess on top of my head. Initially hesitant, I gave in, eliciting the loveliest chuckle from her. Sophia and I became inseparable for the following several months. When we eventually made love, the passion was strong and flawless each time. From that point on, she was the only one in my head, and my pulse was reserved for another lady. We took things slowly, trying to be sure our emotions were genuine and based on trust. I brought her back to my hometown, and Liam and Jessica fell in love with her right away. In the kitchen, Jessica grabbed me aside and said, "Now this is the woman for you, Nathan. Do not let her go." I told her that there was no way. Grace affirmed that I was back to my optimum manner. Grace and Sophia helped me reach to this stage, and I felt proud and appreciative. My new haircut, along with the removal of my beard, helped me lose some weight. Sophia had persuaded me to attempt a clean-shaven appearance, even joking that she wanted to see my face. I chuckled at the proposal, hoping she wouldn't be turned off by the guy in the mask. Fortunately, she wasn't, and I was on cloud 9, feeling as if a weight had been removed. I arrived to Sophia's place feeling elated. Walking through the door, I was greeted by an anxious and pale Sophia. The worried expression reminded me of something I'd seen before. "What's wrong, baby?" I said cautiously, feeling a familiar dread. "We need to talk," she said abruptly, and the walls seemed to be closing in. Those old emotions of nausea assaulted my senses. "Okay," I said as Sophia grabbed my hand and seated me down. "Look, Nathan, if you're going to break up with me, just do it quickly so I can get out of here," I told you suddenly. She recoiled in amazement. "No, honey," she said, grabbing my hand harder and bringing me closer. "I don't know how to say this because I don't want you to get mad at me." My sentiments of anxiety were unrelated to it. "I'm pregnant," she said nervously. I was shocked. We stayed quiet for a few seconds while her gorgeous face furrowed, attempting to assess my response. I stood up and moved a few steps away, turned back to her, anxious and on the edge of tears. I yelled at the top of my lungs and sprang in the air, both fists raised. Her face brightened up, bringing excitement back into her eyes. "You're not mad?" she inquired, recovering her lovely grin. "How could I be mad? I'm going to be a daddy," I exclaimed, holding her in my arms and kissed her passionately on the lips. We hugged each other for the next 5 minutes. I was the happiest guy on earth. Sophia, Grace, and I spent the following 3 days hunting for a home. Despite Sophia's limited funds, I had about $160,000 in the bank, more than enough to purchase a home altogether. In less than a week, we discovered a stunning 5-bedroom colonial in Riverwood. It required some remodeling work, which turned off other purchasers, but given my building background, I was enthusiastic about its possibilities. Our offer was approved and we did not have to take out a mortgage. The day we moved in, I went down on one knee and proposed to Sophia. It happened quickly, but I loved her so much and knew she was the one for me. She accepted. I'd want to say that from then, we lived happily ever after, but it would ignore the reason I'm sat here in this courtroom. Just to be clear, I was not being charged with anything. A few weeks after we moved into our new house, I received a phone call from Liam. It was really incredible. I had completely forgotten about Liam requesting Jessica's co-worker to dig into my ex-wife's new spouse, and to be honest, so did Liam. If this had been going on for months, I had no clue how much it would cost me, and to be honest, I didn't want to know what he had discovered. Nonetheless, Liam was overjoyed and couldn't wait to tell me about his discovery. I stayed mute as Liam started speaking. "The whole thing is a house of cards, Nathan," he said, laughing. "Jessica's guy dug around, and after you gave us the full name, it set the wheels in motion. It turns out the IRS and the FBI got involved." "Hold on," I screamed, believing I had missed a significant portion of the narrative. "What do you mean the FBI is involved?" "Just listen, Nathan. Just listen to this," he urged, trying to calm me down. "Hannah and Jacob are listed as joint co-owners of Mythos Enterprises, a company that owns both the house and the landscaping company. The company is in serious debt, and that's just for starters. Hannah's name is now on the deeds of the house, which is worth over $800,000, but the mortgage payments are made through Mythos Enterprises, which owns both the house and the business." I was trying to keep up, and I knew Liam was doing his best to convey what Jessica's husband had clearly told him. "Jessica's guy alerted the IRS, who, by the way, will be picking up his tab," Liam told me. I was relieved to learn that I wouldn't be saddled with a large cost. Anyway, the IRS investigated Jacob Taylor and found out he's on their wanted list. They had a picture of him or something, so he's a fraud, I continued, emphasizing what was clear. "Oh, you're right, Nathan, but wait until you hear what happened next," Liam teased. "Well, this investigation alerted the attention of some big corporate type in Savannah, Georgia." "Yep," Liam said happily. "His name is Davis Warren, and he has a daughter called Julia Clark. She's currently estranged from her husband, Nathan Clark. They have 2 kids together and—" "Okay, by now, I'm seriously confused." "Get on with it, Liam," I muttered exasperatedly. "Stick with me, buddy," Liam said hurriedly. "It turns out Nathan Clark is Jacob Taylor." "What?" I yelled into the phone, and I'm sure Liam's ear was ringing, but he wouldn't have cared. He was too busy laughing his head off. "Yes, and they are still legally married," Liam said. "I think he's called a bigamist or something, but that's not the best of it." "What?" I said, eager to learn more. "The FBI got involved, and it turns out the guy is a 2-time felon. He spent time inside for drugs and burglary. I think Mr. Warren managed to get him a reduced sentence for the second conviction. He's a powerful man apparently. Anyways, the feds investigated him, and this Nathan, Jacob, whatever his name is, made contact with another suspect they were looking into regarding drug trafficking crimes." My thoughts shifted back to Hannah and her friends and family. I could just imagine their faces at this size. I began smiling. There's more, Nathan, Liam continued. The FBI and the IRS worked together to bring this man down. They discovered him in a storage facility near his home and began to question how a guy in debt could afford $1 million mansion and a luxury lifestyle. It became all too evident. How? I inquired, fascinated. They discovered heroin, stolen goods, and other illegal substances in his storage facility and vehicle. They honestly believe he was preparing to depart again. He had luggage full of clothing and other items in his vehicle. It's unbelievable. I began to laugh, and Sophia joined me on the couch, shaking her head and laughing as well. She had no clue what she was laughing at or why I was so pleased. So how about Hannah? I questioned, and Sophia turned around and frowned at me. I placed my palm over the speaker and muttered to her, "You're not going to believe this," shaking my head and hanging up. Liam continued to talk as I returned the phone to my ear. She was arrested. Her parents have managed to keep the story out of the media, but I anticipate it to become front-page news in the coming days. It's a major news story, after all. I actually think Liam was more excited than I was, because honestly, any feelings I had for Hannah, ill or otherwise, were gone. I reached for Sophia's hand and held it just to confirm that fact. After I ended the call, I turned to Sophia with eager anticipation and told her everything. She was shocked and surprised because, while she knew Hannah was a complete jerk, it never occurred to her that she might be a criminal. All I could think about was what her parents, family, and the so-called social elites would think of her now. Poor old daddy had a duped criminal for a daughter, and that couldn't go over well at the country club. I had to laugh to myself, and Sophia knew what I was thinking and laughed with me. A few days later, the front page of every newspaper in the area, as well as every media news channel, was covering the story. I guess Hannah's parents still had some leverage in the community, because she barely got a mention. Of course, the bigamous drug trafficking con man was splashed all over our screens, but the female accomplice who moved in elite social circles and was well known in the corporate financial world was not named. Less than a week later, we discovered that Nathan Clark was really 42 years old, not 38 as he claimed, and that my ex-wife had abandoned me for an older criminal who had already wrecked her life. Maybe she wasn't as bright as she believed. My ex-wife, who had dumped me nearly 9 months ago, was no longer there. Her hair was thinner, and she had huge dark bags under her eyes. When I looked up, I saw my pregnant fiancée, who looked completely different, and I felt like the luckiest man alive, not only to have her, but also to be shot of my. In the months that followed, the whole issue died down. We had our first family Christmas in the new house. Sophia's parents came to stay with us, Jessica and Liam stopped by, and I was surprised to see a few of my old friends from my construction days get back in touch. I loved Sophia too, and it was they who talked me into getting back into the construction game. Sophia and Grace agreed, which is another reason I love them. In the new year, I quit my job and became a self-employed tradesman, working on construction sites but also doing small jobs in the community. Ironically, I began to get a lot of requests to do gardening work in quite a few neighborhoods. I was even surprised to be contacted by Matthew and Jessica, but only if I promised not to try anything on with Jessica. They had my word. In March, Sophia gave birth to our twins, Jack and Lily, and in April, we married in a small ceremony in Charleston. It had been just over a year since Hannah's divorce, and to think how much had happened in that time is astonishing. However, it would not be the last time I saw her. My new, perfect life had been going so well until a visitor came knocking on my door completely out of the blue. Mr. Andrew James, from the law firm Carter and James, was defending Miss Hannah Hughes in her upcoming court case. I was surprised she had returned to her maiden name. Surely, Mommy and Daddy wouldn't want the good Hughes name dragged through the mud. Mr. James made himself at ease in my house as he spoke. "We would like you to provide a good character testimony for Hannah, Miss Hughes," he asked directly. I laughed. "Why would I do that?" I responded. "Prior to your divorce, you knew Miss Hughes better than anybody. You know she's heterosexual and would never be engaged in anything illegal, right?" he asked. I'm not sure whether he was asking or telling me, but I could see where this was headed. "What if I refuse?" A voice behind me abruptly inquired. Sophia appeared from the stairs, clearly listening in on our chat, and Mr. James glanced at me. "What did my wife say?" I offered. "Well, we can get a subpoena and compel you to appear. If you don't show up, we'll charge you and put you in prison," he threatened in a scary tone. My immediate instinct was to beat him in the face and hurl him headfirst through the door, but as I looked at my wife, I realized I had too much to lose. I had no clue whether what he said was correct or even legal, but for one court appearance, I gave in to his demands. So here I am, sitting in the waiting room of the courtroom. The trial had been going on for a couple of days, and as my appearance approached, I turned to Sophia. "What do I say, honey?" I asked quietly. She took my hand and looked at me with those beautiful blue eyes, saying, "You are the most honest and kind guy I've ever met. Just be honest." My ex-wife's legal team had coerced me into attending, assuming that I would speak highly of her. I knew that what I said in court would most likely have no bearing on the case, and it could be the biggest mistake they had ever made, because I was not going to do so. Nathan Clark was sentenced to 70 years in prison after being found guilty of bigamy, a federal charge of Schedule I drug possession with intent to supply, perjury, handling stolen property, and a slew of other charges related to defrauding the United States government. In order to get a lesser sentence, he implicated Hannah in the fraud and handling stolen goods. What's the saying about thieves having no honor? I thought to myself, the stolen property accusations were being fought, but on fraud, the IRS had her all wrapped up. "Mr. Green, we are ready for you," the bailiff said. I rose to my feet and exhaled loudly. Sophia had left to join the public gallery while Grace looked after the twins in the waiting room. They were sound asleep, oblivious to it all. In the courtroom, my name was announced, and as I approached the stand, I could feel the eyes of the entire courtroom on me. It was a strange atmosphere. There were a few gasps as I took the stand, especially from those sat behind the defendant. As I took the oath, I turned to face the room, and it was the first time in over a year that I had seen Hannah in the flesh. She was dressed in an orange prison uniform and surrounded on either side by an expensively put-together defense team. She was looking down at her feet, but I made eye contact with her parents and then a few of her friends who sat behind her. I made out a couple of people who looked at me and mouthed the word "wow." The irony of me now looking down on them from the witness stand was not lost on me. I spent our entire marriage with them all looking down on me. Now, the roles had been reversed. Andrew James stood up and started to speak. "Thank you for coming today, Mr. Green," he said. "Well, Mr. James, wasn't I given much of a choice?" I replied, staring down at him. He recoiled at my tone, and all eyes turned towards him to see what his response would be. At that moment, Hannah finally lifted her head and looked in my direction. Her eyes flew wide open and her jaw dropped. She suddenly burst into tears, causing everyone to turn and look. The realization must have hit her: the man she fell in love with had made a welcome return, and the man she had destroyed was gone. She was now inconsolable as the Jew. Mr. Green is the defendant's ex-husband, whom my client admittedly treated quite nicely throughout the divorce. "Wouldn't you agree that the allegations against her surprise you?" he asked. "No objections from the prosecutor," he said. I was stunned, but was treated properly throughout the divorce. "I guess you and I have different ideas on that," I said boldly as whispers came from behind him. I could see Hannah's dad chatting to one of the team members as Hannah continued to cry. "Okay, Mr. Green, but would you say that throughout your time together, the defendant was always an honest, industrious, and law-abiding citizen?" he asked. "Well, she was cheating on me for 4 months with a man she described as younger, more attractive, and successful," I told her. "So once again, we probably have our own definitions of honesty. Remember, he only threatened me to turn up, not paint a picture of a perfect innocent woman," I continued, keeping my voice calm. "I was just being honest, like Grace said I should be. But would you agree that throughout that period, you disregarded your physical and intellectual health? So, could you really blame the defendant for moving on when a better opportunity presented itself?" he said truthfully. The defense began excavating my ex-wife's grave, and there was an almost unanimous chorus of disapproving sighs from the public gallery and the prosecution bench, who clearly felt that they were no longer required at this stage. The judge issued an order, allowing me time to consider my response. "I agree that I ignored elements of my life," I continued, my voice firm. "It was really difficult to live with someone who dominated my life, and his family and friends thought you were beneath them. The defendant's father once referred to me as a good-looking dumbass," I added freely, and the defense's face of amazement and bewilderment was almost too amusing to describe. Hannah was simply gazing at me, sympathy in her eyes, and I had none in return. That may be, Mr. Green, but there is no evidence that the defendant was ever engaged in illegal behavior. There is no evidence to imply that she was dishonest or intent on committing fraud throughout your time together. She paid her payments, including yours, for a time, and never broke the law. Is that correct? He responded, evidently uncomfortable. Objection. The prosecutor stood forward and said, Your Honor, this is inadmissible. The witness is not here to argue that the defendant did no crime. It's a waste of court time. Sustained, the court said. The defense can rephrase the question. Mr. James was confused, but cleared his throat and began his line of questions. Mr. Green, throughout your time together, the defendant was an honest person who paid all of her bills, taxes, and mortgage. She even paid yours for a while. Is this correct? He said. Yes, was my response. But I have no idea what type of person she has been over the last year. Well, I think we can take a guess, I said. Objection, Mr. James, the court said, amused. What do you mean by objection, Mr. James? He's your character witness, the judge added, trying not to chuckle as half the courtroom erupted in amusement. The jury had to turn away. Your Honor, he is obviously a bitter ex-husband seeking revenge on the woman who dumped him and moved on, Mr. James remarked, becoming enraged. The defense team was now over themselves with fear, and Hannah was staring back and forth between her parents and her attorney, tears streaming down her cheeks. The judge spoke again. If he's a bitter ex-husband, why did you put him on the stand? He inquired, his voice full of contempt. The prosecution team just sat back and smirked at one another. Is it true that you are a bitter man who only wants to see your ex-wife suffer? Mr. James inquired after a time of quiet. If this had occurred 11 months ago, you may have had a point, I answered, my voice steady. But today, I have nothing to be resentful about. Your Honor, I may not be an intelligent man, but I am an honest man. Please, Mr. Green, Mr. James said. Your ex-wife. Ex-wife, I corrected. So, your ex-wife leaves you for another guy, and you have no ill will towards her or her family? He poked. No, I responded, gazing right into his eyes. As I said 11 months ago, maybe you might have hinted that. But since then, I have discovered the most beautiful lady in the world, I said, turning to look at Sophia in the public gallery. She picked me up, put me back together, and now I get to call her my wife. She gave me 3 gorgeous children. We have fantastic friends, a wonderful family, a lovely house, and a thriving company. Who in the world would be angry about all of that? I said, maintaining constant eye contact with my lovely wife and a grin on my lips. She merely smiled at me and nodded. I turned back to see the defense looking tense, Hannah's parents looking down at their hands, and Hannah looking distraught and sobbing as she caught my eye. I mouthed the words thank you to her, and she collapsed into her arms onto the table. As I walked through the door, I heard a big commotion with Hannah at the center of it, screaming, sorry, I love you. But I had no idea whether it was meant at me, and I honestly didn't care. Hannah was sentenced to 6 years in prison for conspiracy to defraud the United States government, a Class A misdemeanor. She was also found guilty of 5th-degree possession of stolen goods, which was a Class A misdemeanor. I had no idea what that meant, but I read it as Title 18, 371, 26, 7201, and 7206, 1 and 2. First, life is pretty great. The twins are getting bigger every day, and their smiles can lift the clouds on even the darkest days, which I am pleased to say are few and far between. My business is booming, and Sophia now has a few clients who visit our home for hair and beauty treatments. Grace is breezing through her final year of college, which I am now paying for, by the way. It's the least I could do for her because she saved my life. As the months passed, my life continued to improve in ways I never thought possible. The weight I had been carrying for years had finally lifted, and I realized just how much I had let go of the past. Sophia, Grace, the twins, and I were now a family, and everything felt right. My business was thriving, and the community projects I had begun to take on provided me with a sense of fulfillment I had never known I needed. It wasn't just about the money anymore, it wasn't about the status, it was about waking up every morning with the love of my life by my side and 3 beautiful children who made every day brighter. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was thriving, and for the first time in a long time, I truly believed I was exactly where I needed to be. There were still moments when the pain from my past would resurface and I would think back on those years with Hannah, the years that felt like they defined me, but I quickly realized that those years were just chapters in a much bigger story, one that wasn't over yet. I was now writing my own future, and it wouldn't be tainted by my past. I had the love and support of Sophia, the bond one had with Grace, and the understanding that the past no longer had a hold on me. As much as Hannah's betrayal had shaken me to my core, it had eventually led me to a place I would never have arrived at if things had remained the same. I learned that sometimes the most difficult trials bring the greatest rewards. Life wasn't perfect, but I'd learned to enjoy the simple things: family meals, weekend walks in the park, the sound of Grace smiling as she played with the twins. I had so much to be grateful for, and every day I reminded myself of how far I'd come. In the quiet moments when the hustle of life slowed down, I would reflect on everything: the man I had been, the man I was now. There were no more ghosts of the past hanging over me. I wasn't the same man who had walked into that courtroom months ago, crushed by the weight of betrayal. Now, I was someone who had found a new sense of purpose, someone who had rebuilt his life from the ground up. I knew there would always be obstacles ahead of me, but now I was prepared to meet them front on, with the power I had discovered inside myself. I was no longer frightened. Thank you for watching. Which moment in this tale stuck out to you the most? Tell us in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe.